Member for Dennery North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's been a while since I stood in this House to make a presentation. During that time, quite a few things have happened on the national front and regionally, and I will crave your indulgence to add my voice to that of the Prime Minister's when this morning he expressed condolences to the people of the Bahamas at the passage of Hurricane Dorian. On the domestic front, Mr. Speaker, the sports fraternity was saddened by the death of Dhanraj Chaz Sipal, a young man whom I knew very well, Mr. Speaker, and I would have intimated on social media that my son was in the national youth cricket setup together with him. And so when news broke of his passing, as a former national cricketer and as a parent, I was extremely saddened, and I understood, Mr. Speaker, the level of pain and discomfort that tragedy brought for his family. And so I want to take the opportunity to express my personal condolences to the family and the collective condolences of the people of Dennery North. Mr. Speaker, I rise from the privileged position of parliamentary representative for Dennery North to not just add my voice to the debate on the motion presented by my friend, colleague, and member for Castries South, but instead, Mr. Speaker, to give my unequivocal support to the member on that motion and for mustering the courage to take the motion to the Parliament to cause a frank debate, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the CIP and its implications for our country. But, Mr. Speaker, before I proceed, I think I need to once again, with your permission, place on the parliamentary record my gratitude to the people of Oleon, La Pelle, Richfond, Denier Riviere, Despines, La Ressource, Belmont, Gadet, Grand Riviere, and Grand Ravine for allowing me to be their collective voice on matters of national importance in and out of the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is a responsibility that I take very, very seriously. And it would be remiss of me today to just sit here and allow the CIP debate to go on without making a contribution. Mr. Speaker, during the 1980s leading to the new millennium, St. Lucia's economy was rather strong, as were most of the economies in the Eastern Caribbean, Barbados and the Windward Islands in particular. The banana revenue was substantial. There was a constant inflow of money. The tourism industry was beginning to serve as a worthy complement to the banana industry. And we had very reliable friends, Mr. Speaker, as a country, who made aid available to governments to roll out programs for the benefit of St. Lucians. But, Mr. Speaker, along the way and in very quick time, there were some events on the world stage that had very dire consequences for the economies of the Caribbean, St. Lucia not being an exception. And this was coupled or complemented by some decisions on the domestic front, which worsened the economies of some Caribbean islands, St. Lucia included. We had the 9/11 fiasco. We had a global economic recession. We had trading arrangements that affected us, where we lost preferential treatment for our bananas, and so on. And so countries were at their wits' end, trying to survive, trying to stay afloat, trying to get resources to continue to provide for their countries. And, Mr. Speaker, non-traditional ways had to be resorted to provide that buffer, to make the resources available so that programs could have been rolled out in the different communities. Hence, the Citizenship by Investment Program, or what we know as the CIP. The CIP, Mr. Speaker, c'est un programme que yon des pays Caraïbes là décidé de maintenir l'argent pour faire bail pays ou bail moun yo. Yo de kay bail millionnaire puis billionnaire puis moun qui n'y a chay l'argent qui a été un pays étranger. Passeport et fait yo citoyen pays a. Et là yo vini citoyen pays a, yo kay mener l'argent entre pour faire projet qui kay faire économie cette ici développer pour aider pour bail mon travail et pour bail gouvernement l'argent pour faire projet. And so, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, en 2016, St. Lucia became the 5th Caribbean country to roll out the CIP program. Before St. Lucia, Antigua and Barbuda were already in the, immersed in the CIP program, as were Dominica, Grenada, and St. Kitts. And from the inception, Mr. Speaker, the CIP generated debate at all levels of our society. The bus drivers had their say, commuters had their say, parliamentarians had their say, politicians who were aspiring to become parliamentarians had their say, and so the debate was widespread. And Mr. Speaker, up to a day like today, since 2015, 4 years, almost 5 years since we rolled out the CIP, it is still a very topical debate in the politics of St. Lucia, and it's also a very topical issue for the average citizen. Mr. Speaker, the CIP created a new revenue stream. CIP created for us, or brought in monies that previous administrations did not have at their disposal. The member of Vivote South, when he served as Prime Minister, he did not enjoy the proceeds of the CIP in terms of programming for this country. The member for Castries North, when he served as Prime Minister, would have been happy to work with the proceeds of the CIP. But Mr. Speaker, we've heard in this House today that the CIP has netted in excess or close to $100 million in the form of revenue for this country. And we are also being told, in addition to the amount or the quantum that it has netted, that changes proposed by the government will make that program more robust to bring about more benefits for the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, with the revenue that we've received from the CIP, is that causing the average citizen to be less irate than he ought to be when we see pictures or photographs of patients lying on the floors of our hospitals at the same time that the horse racing track is under construction? And I heard the Prime Minister saying earlier on that the horse racing track is not a CIP project. But Mr. Speaker, that is not the point. The point is, how do you address that in the psyche of the average citizen? How do you tell the average citizen that he is supposed to be okay with a horse racing track being under construction at a time when patients have to find comfort on the floor of a hospital? And if we are going to change the regulations to the CIP, Mr. Speaker, if we are going to say that the escrow account
Mr. Speaker,
that is supposed to...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, the debate going on there is on the adjustments, the resolution by the member. I am failing to even make a linkage between a private developer executing a project and a hospital. Where does that fit into the equation? The member is going down a road of misleading the country into believing that there is a relationship between the DSH project and the hospital and CIP. when it has been well established that DSH is not a CIP project?
Mr. Speaker, I was making the point that the CIP is a novel stream of revenue that previous administrations did not have at their disposal. And I'm saying, in addition to the amounts that were quoted by the Prime Minister, he quoted the amounts, and changes to the existing or the original regulations have been proposed. And that if we are going to make those changes, I want for those changes, at least in the psyche, in the minds of the average St. Lucian, for them to understand that these new monies will benefit their situation. And instead of seeing horse racing tracks being constructed at a time when people are lying on the floors of our hospital, that cannot be right. I never for once, Mr. Speaker, indicated or said that any horse racing track was being funded by revenues from the CDP. And I will continue, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, with that additional revenue, the question has to be asked, or with the changes in the regulations, are we going to see more happening in the different communities of this country? Are the proposed changes going to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we have better healthcare delivery in this country? Le gouvernement prend décision pour faire changement manière CIP programme qu'a tapé conduit. Est-ce nous qu'aïoué et puis ce changement ça là, Mr. Speaker? Situation en l'hôpital St. Jude et puis l'hôpital Victoria qu'a venu plimer. Est-ce nous qu'aïoué, Mr. Speaker, that situation en health center la ressource qu'a tapé adressée? Are the changes being proposed? How are those changes going to result, Mr. Speaker, in benefits for the average St. Lucian? Mr. Speaker, we understood when we got into the CIP that it was something that would have evoked a lot of emotions from the average St. Lucian. And we had our misgivings, Mr. Speaker, but as I said, countries were at their wits' end trying to find new monies to roll out programs for their people. And we saw what happened, or we've seen that the government has amassed close to $100 million in CIP revenue. But how is that reflected in the betterment of living conditions for the average St. Lucians in the different pocket communities? Or is it a case where the CIP has become a replacement, Mr. Speaker, for the shortfall in the VAT revenue? And maybe that is why we are not seeing the benefits. So I'm asking here today, yes, the proposals have been put forward. Yes, the regulations are being changed. But I am not convinced, Mr. Speaker, that the changes being proposed will bring relief to the people of Lapel whose roads in Dennery North have been in a deplorable condition for the longest while. So if we're going to come here to propose changes to the existing legislation, let the changes speak to better living conditions for people in this country, irrespective of which constituency they emanate from. So, Mr. Speaker, bon matin, je vais supporter motion that mon parlement pour Castries Sud mener un parlement. Il a dit, Mr. Speaker, that ce changement gouvernement qu'a fait et puis loi CIP, ça part pour bénéfice Jean ici et pour pays entièrement. And so, Mr. Speaker, with this very short presentation, I want to once again support the motion as presented by the member for Castries South, and I'm hoping that at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, politics aside, good sense will prevail and the right thing will be done, not in our own personal interest, but in the interest of the different constituencies we represent in this parliament. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.